So we are calling the meeting to order at 6:49 Mountain. Let me share my screen. Okay, so the agenda should be up for you guys. I do want to pull up the chat window though. Sometimes I don't like the way Zoom does this. Okay. Are you ready, Madam Secretary, to take attendance?
Sure. Arrowwood, present. Bracco,
Present.
Zazelski,
Present.
Harlos,
Present?
Latham,
Here.
Martin,
Present.
Molman,
Here.
Rowlett, I'll come back to him. Rufo,
Here.
Seebeck,
That's the rumor.
Tom Rowlett. Okay, I'll call the alternates. Number one, Dr. Chuck Moulton.
Present.
Okay. Number two, Rich Tomaso. Number three, Dave Roberson. Number four, Greg Deal. Number five, Roger Roots. Number six, Data Logan.
Data's here.
All right. And number seven, Dean Rogers.
I am here.
All right. Tom Rowlett. Madam Chair, Tom Rowlett is not reported as here, so we would move Dr. Moulton into his place.
Okay, perfect. So now we're on to opportunity for public comment, and that of course includes committee members who have something that's kind of outside of the agenda. I know that Mr. Jacobs had requested to speak in public comment. So did you want to go first, Mr. Jacobs?
If there's no actual party member who would like to go ahead of me, I'd yield to them. But if I may, I just wanted to comment on something that I noticed. I take it you can all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. I noticed that there was some question about electronic ballots. I wanted to give you a little bit of background on something. There was some discussion in 2022 around April 1st, 2022, April 2nd on the LNC regarding electronic ballots, or electronic voting, excuse me. I wrote an opinion which has been published and is on the list at that time. I believe Mr. Molman was also participating in debate on that. But I did want to refer to two things that were related to that specific type of voting and related specifically to that opinion. I gave the opinion that the electronic voting that was being suggested at that type, I think it was called porcupine, I'm not certain about that, had two problems that ran afoul of your bylaws. The first one was it did not permit write-ins in elections. The second one was it permitted absentee voting. And there was some question about if you needed to authorize electronic voting itself in the bylaws. Even in conjunction with that opinion, the answer is no. You can do this by a special rule, but you would have to either have a system that would permit write-in votes or abolish write-in voting in your bylaws, which you are talking about. And it would have to be a situation that did not permit absentee voting unless you authorized it in your bylaws. Mr. Molman, who I referred to before, actually posted something related to that at the time where he talked about a method where there would be electronic voting machines in the room, if I recall correctly. I'm sure he can jump in and tell me if I'm correctly summarizing him or not. But I just wanted to be clear and give you that background that there is no specific problem with electronic voting, and it does not have to be authorized in your bylaws, but it would have to otherwise comply with your bylaws. In other words, you would either have to authorize absentee voting in your bylaws and prohibit write-in votes, or you would have to have a system that would not permit absentee voting and would permit write-in votes. I just wanted to give you that background. I'm not taking a position on what you should do or shouldn't do on this. Thank you.
Hi,
That's
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
Mr. Molman?
Yes, since I was mentioned, I'll just note, in looking into this, having sat on the convention committee for a few terms, we looked into this extensively based on what the bylaws say today. And today, literally the only form that could ever happen would be some sort of Scantron, which is a trademarked thing, so you can't call it Scantron. But that type of ballot is what they intended. And looking at the rules as they exist, that's the only thing that would work. That said, you know, the proposal is obviously to change all that, but that's the background as far as at the time that this was previously discussed, the only thing that would work would be Scantron. And it should be noted that in that scenario today, as it exists, it requires each voter to sign their ballot as well, which means that it is not an anonymous ballot. So just things to keep in mind about what is there today, not what is going to be proposed or potentially there tomorrow.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Molman. And just a clarification, because we all do this. I do it more frequently than others. We tend to say bylaws generically for things that are contained within that document. That is a convention rule, though. So it would have been, it is potentially suspendable, but you can't count on the delegates voting to suspend it. Mr. Latham.
Well, sorry, had to find the unmute. And I hope this is not, we're almost getting into debate here, but I think I disagree with the premise, and maybe Madam Chair and others can correct me. I don't know that signing the ballot makes it a non-secret ballot. I think that's a loose term. As I've been reading through it, I don't think it's very well defined, but I'd be curious to hear others' thoughts. And it seems like if the interface is, and for example, I think this would come up in one of the questions, like there's a scenario where the secretary, if there's multiple challenges to the electronic balloting, the secretary has to go around and verify, each ballot. I presume that would be the secretary and the teller team. In fact, if I didn't make that amendment, I would probably make that amendment.
Yeah, let's
but I guess it would be private.
Let's not get into specific proposals, public comments, more for general things.
Okay, but I think it's an interesting question whether signing a ballot makes it unsecret as per our parliamentary authority.
It
So
does.
that's my comment.
It unquestionably makes it a non-secret ballot.
Oh, and okay. And what's our authority for that interpretation?
I don't have the citations right in front of me. Besides,
Thank you.
It's
JJ posted a
okay
citation.
Yeah, but a signed ballot is by its very nature not secret. We use those in Colorado. Yeah, as Jessica kind of said, it's kind of the opposite of a secret ballot. It's almost like asking why is the sky, not purple, and it'd be because it's blue.
And if I maybe
You're being a lawyer, Mr. Latham.
Well, that's who I am, or that's part of my identity. I identify as a lawyer. I'm listening to the book, by the way, Nudge, finally getting around to that, by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. Some may know it for its promotion of the term libertarian paternalism, which has driven a lot of libertarians nuts. It's actually not as bad as you think it might be. But they actually cite some studies about the very bad effects of getting rid of the secret ballot and having an open ballot kind of creates kind of, bad outcomes, right? We don't get to think independently so much. So I think there's a difference between organizations and governments when it comes to the secrecy of ballots, but that listening to that, I will say, has really informed my opinion on secret ballots quite a bit. So I'll shut up.
Right, thank you, Mr. Latham. And just note, Ms. Arrowood, Mr. Roulette is here and he has his hand raised for public comment.
Oh, no, I was just saying I'm here. Sorry, I'm late.
Oh, okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak during public comment? Okay, seeing none. Oh, wait, Dr. Moulton.
Yeah, I'll briefly talk since it looks like I think we have a full crowd here, so I won't get to really participate in this meeting. But I will note that at the end of the last meeting, we workshopped the last proposal we were talking about. I like what we came up with in the workshop. I think there's been some more discussion on the list since then. But I would encourage the committee members to strongly consider substituting or amending with the things we talked about in the workshop, because I think we came up with some good ideas there that are substantially better than what I see on the agenda here. The other thing I would note is there was some discussion on the list in the past week of ways to change the LNC. One of the proposals floated, which seemed to have been rejected since then, but the idea put forth by Mr. Bracco was to, instead of having a hybrid between representation by regions and at large, to switch to all at large and eliminate regions. And there was discussion about whether that was too big a change, too little a change, or whatever. I just want to throw in my 2 cents that I like that as a concept, and it's the concept that has been my preference for well over a decade. I don't know whether this committee will get around to it, but I do think it's the direction the party should ultimately go in. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Moulton. You guys get to hear me drone on for just a little bit, and I promise it will be brief. I'm noticing in some of the proposals and discussion that is coming up on the list, and maybe in some proposals where there seems to be perhaps some confusion or lack of education, which isn't a bad thing because you can always gain education, on the idea of bylaws that are in the nature of a rule of order. If you put just because you put something in your bylaws doesn't make it a bylaw. Just like if you put something in your standing rules that's actually a special rule of order, it doesn't magically transform it into a standing rule. And Roberts, it's the nature of the thing, not what you call it. So it is possible to put in your bylaws things that are actually rules of order, which means they're suspendable. And that causes confusion with the delegates as to what's suspendable and what's not. And I know Ms. Mattson and Mr. Starr and Mr. Carling and a lot of past bylaws members did a lot of hard work in making sure that rules were in convention rules and that things in the bylaws were actual bylaws. So I just want to read a couple things to you for you guys to think about as you're doing your proposal. I'll repeat where Robert said almost what I said. It said, although rules in the nature of special rules of order are sometimes placed in the bylaws, such an arrangement is less desirable because it leads to cases of uncertainty as to whether a particular rule can be suspended. Now, where things get a little tricky is what exactly is a rule of order. And, there's some gray areas where parliamentarians disagree, but there's also some that are super, super clear. So sometimes it won't be quite so clear. But just so you hear the Roberts description of a special rule of order, for your reference, it's 214. And it says the term rules of order refers to written rules of parliamentary procedure formally adopted by an assembly and organization. Such rules relate to the orderly transaction of business and meetings and to the duties of officers in that connection. And then there would, in contrast to bylaws, rules of order derive their substance largely from the general nature of the parliamentary process rather than from the circumstances of a particular assembly. I've also seen some instances where there's actually things that would be standing rules that are placed within the bylaws, which is, I think, an even bigger no-no. And standing rules relate to details of administration. The classic example of a standing rule would be something that says at a convention, if you're on the convention floor, all delegates shall display their name tag. That would be a standing rule. You know, so just be really careful of those sorts of things. There's nothing saying you can't put them in the bylaws. It's just a really bad idea. It's not good practice. Dr. Moulton, did you have your hand still raised, or is that an artifact? All right, thank you. Unless there's any questions on that issue, I just wanted to just give a heads up on it. And we're going to move to Ms. Arrowwood's point of order regarding proposal W, which was Mr. Molman's proposal that would revamp. I'm going to summarize it, probably not exactly accurately, but accurately enough for this, which was to revamp the LNC into a system where it would almost be like a consortium of state chairs. It fundamentally changed the structure of the LNC. Also, alternate proposal X did so, but in a much less extensive way. Ms. Arrowwood raised a point of order that proposal W would be out of order because it was substantially a revision of the bylaws. I spoke with Mr. Jacobs, I spoke with Mr. Brown, and then I also posted on the Roberts Rules of Order forum and interacted with one of the authors of Roberts, Mr. Hahnemann, who didn't tell me I needed an education. So that was really sweet. And after those conversations, my first inclination was to say that the chair is uncertain and to submit the point of order to the committee. But after talking with Mr. Hahnemann, I actually am certain. I am certain right now that, apologies to Ms. Arrowwood, but I do rule her point of order not well taken for several reasons. And there were two questions, and I did put down a written ruling because I like to have these things for the record, and Ms. Arrowwood can incorporate that into her minutes. But it raised two questions. One, is this committee authorized to do a revision? Because if it is, it doesn't matter if it's a revision. No, this committee is not authorized to do a revision. I did not find Mr. Molman's arguments that it was persuasive. However, I also found it didn't matter, because we don't have notice requirements in our bylaws. And the whole thing about niceties of procedure when it comes to revision has to do with scope of notice. It would be perfectly in order in this committee, believe it or not, for someone to move a substitute for our entire set of bylaws. Since that would be in order, it really, to me, makes no difference as to whether or not we're authorized to do a revision, but technically speaking, we are not. That has to be specifically authorized. It can't just be inferred from the fact that we're called the Bylaws Committee and the bylaws don't assign specific duties. However, the second point is, if we're not authorized to do a revision, is this a revision? No, I don't think it's a revision. It's almost one, but I don't think it is one. So that is my ruling. I'm giving an opportunity for my ruling to be appealed. Okay, seeing no appeal, we are going to move to where we left off, which was, speaking of notice requirements, it was to add notice requirements, just to add a tiny bit of commentary as well. They didn't come right out and say it, but in that discussion on Roberts, I think they were quite surprised that there wasn't notice requirements, because they kept saying, now let me be clear, there's no notice requirements in your bylaws. And I'm like, nope, none at all. So that's not good. That's probably one of the biggest flaws in our bylaws. As Dr. Moulton mentioned, there had been quite a bit of workshopping, and I do have a question for Dr. Moulton because he said the workshopping is different than what's on the agenda. I think it is on the agenda. We have the link to the original proposal. Then we had a couple of offerings from Mr. Bracco. And I put forth an alternate proposal. I think that alternate proposal is the result of workshopping where Mr. Bracco and I attempted to come to a consensus, and we only differed in a couple different ways. So, Dr. Moulton, is it your understanding that there was additional workshopping that's not reflected in any of these links?
You'd have to give me a minute to look at your proposal. I had looked at the three proposals from Mr. Bracco, and none of them seem to be what we workshop. Your proposal, it seems to have a bunch of extra language beyond what we workshopped. So I think part of the benefit of what we workshopped was brevity, and this removes some of that brevity. So I guess that's my main concern.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to ask if there's objection to one thing. We originally last meeting, and I see your hand, Mr. Bracco, I'll call on you in one. Well, actually, let me call on you now because you may tell me something that will change what I'm about to say. So, Mr. Bracco.
So just to add some, and sort of connect the dots here, I think the workshopping that I believe Dr. Moulton was referring to was done after the April 20th meeting. And Madam Chair, I think this was after we had adjourned. People were just hanging out on the call doing it. And I think you had stepped away. If I linked it in the chat. I believe that the result of that workshopping was the first document in the email thread that is now in the chat. Proposal OV3, that one, the very first, the opening email.
Yes.
So if I recall correctly, the proposal O, so not like, I don't think I had moved any amendment at the end of that. I think we had adjourned before that. But I think that proposal O was on the floor. Is that correct?
Yes, and I might have worded amendment here loosely. I meant ones that in that email thread you had told me you intended upon making. You hadn't made them yet. Proposal O was on the floor when we last adjourned. That version 3 is what was, or at least one of those things that were entitled V2, V3. After the last meeting, but then you and I attempted to come to an agreement, and those could also be proposed, but I had lots of issues with it, if I recall, and then you and I workshopped further.
Yes.
Okay. What I'm going to ask the committee is, when we left the last meeting, Proposal O was on the floor. After further discussion and negotiations between Mr. Bracco and myself, I had come up with what's now on the screen, which I'll pull up in a minute, but it's on the agenda as CAH alternate. Because that was a result of a bunch of back and forth, so we could save a bunch of amendments that I will end up making anyway, I would ask the committee if there's any objection to me withdrawing the original proposal O and instead moving my proposal O alternate, which was the last discussion between Mr. Bracco and I where we still had some tiny disagreements, but we were much closer and it will save a lot of time from amendments I'd end up making anyway. Mr. Seebeck.
Yeah, point of personal privilege. Who is the first alternate right now?
It would be Dr. Moulton, but I don't believe we're missing anybody.
I need to step out for a minute. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, Dr. Moulton would be stepping in.
Then I'm temporarily ceding to Dr. Moulton for my spot because I have to go take care of some personal business.
Okay, are
I'll be
you
back.
you
Thank you.
signing off or are you just gonna let
Stepping
us know
out.
when you're back? Okay, just
I'll let
post
you
in
back.
chat or raise your hand or something when you're back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seebeck. So what I'm gonna, is there objection to be withdrawing proposal O and putting the further workshopped version to avoid having to make a bunch of amendments? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to pull up where it says CAH alternate of proposal O, and we will work from there. Mr. Bracco might make some amendments. He did give notice of them. That is on the screen. I think it might take us a few moments to get our sea legs back as to where we were.
Point of information, Madam Chair.
Yes, Dr. Moulton?
I do have, I think I have your proposal in front of me right now, which I think is what we're discussing. Proposal O. Am I to understand, what I'm trying to figure out is the highlighted yellow part. What effect does that have? Does that substitute for another part, or is it in addition to this other part?
I might be the only one who has to get their sea legs back. Alternative amendment, a language. You remember, Mr. Bracco, I believe.
If I recall correctly, both this version that's now on the table and my the versions that I will propose when it's the right opportunity, they're both kind of like different versions depending on whether proposal E passes. So I don't believe that either of us are intending to change the way that platform planks are deleted, but because that particular proposal does, I think certainly my intention, and I believe yours as well, is to make this proposal agnostic to whether or not that proposal passes.
Yes, that does ring a bell with me. So proposal E was a proposal that changed which did pass the committee, the deletion threshold from a majority to 2/3. However, we don't know yet what order we're going to be putting these proposals in. And it may turn out, if we pass proposal O, that we hear it after proposal E. So our language of proposal O has to make contingency plans for E. We, of course, can choose to do this later, but I'd prefer to hammer out that contingency language now. So the alternative amendment language assumed that proposal E passes. The regular language, not the alternative language, is assuming that either proposal E hasn't been heard yet or it failed. So the unhighlighted language deals with the platform assuming it has a majority deletion threshold. Is that your understanding as well, Mr. Bracco?
So I think the difference essentially is the whatever this article 17, I think 3 under your alternative amendment language. I believe the highlighted part, to me, it reads like proposal E either has failed or has not been heard yet, because it's talking about majority vote with prior notice
Okay,
of platform
okay.
deletions.
Okay, gotcha. Does that help, Dr. Moulton?
Yes, I understand now.
Okay. So we're going to go back up to the top so we can recall where we were at. We were moving all of the amendment language into Article 17 rather than having any amendment language in Article 3. So whether or not Proposal E passes, we would still be deleting that language from Article 3 that talks about how to amend the platform. Whatever threshold it ends up being, it doesn't need to be in Article 3. It should be under Article 17 amendment. Then we were changing the title of Article 17, which was just amendment, to amendment and notice, and laid out a process for notice of proposed amendments. And it had two routes for proposed amendments: from official committees, which had a notice requirement of 35 days, or by, let's just call it loosely, petition. It would be a party member can submit a proposal provided they got signatures by 50 sustaining members. And those also would have a notice requirement. The notice requirements for member submissions expires prior to the deadline for the committee submissions, because it's better for things to come through the committee. They might workshop it a little bit, and the committee should have the opportunity to make recommendations on the member proposals. So they have 15 days to do that before their items are required to be published on the website. And then in the rules, the standing order of business, in other words, the agenda, would include an item for other bylaws and rules amendments with notice, meaning from the membership, and same thing for platform. And my proposal, and Mr. Bracco's, does not do this. This was a major difference. My proposal would then turn around and delete Rule 5. The whole reason I'm a fan of Rule 5, and this is a change from last time, so I would like to explain it. I was a fan of Rule 5 before because of the way committees were privileged, that it required a suspension of the rules in order to hear a proposal from the floor. Rule 5 put some power in the hands of the delegates to at least be able to have an automatic vote on platform deletions. If we allow members to have submissions that don't require suspension of the rules and have a spot in the agenda, I don't see a purpose to Rule 5 anymore. And my proposal would make that go away. And then it moves on to add rules for debating and voting for the member submissions. Mr. Bracco, I believe, wants to keep Rule 5. So his amendments or proposed amendments would keep that language and make some allowance for it in Article 17. I wanted to just take a look here at this alternative amendment language. It only deals with Article 17, the new rule, new subsection 2, and then it would add a new subsection 3. So the primary proposal has the party platform And these bylaws may be amended by the delegates at any regular convention by a 2/3 vote with prior notice or by a 3/4 vote from the floor without notice. The alternative amendment language keeps on number 2 just says these bylaws may be amended, so it doesn't lump in the platform, and adds a new section 3. Any platform plank may be amended by the delegates at any regular convention by a 2/3 vote with prior notice or by a 3/4 vote from the floor without prior notice. And any platform plank may be deleted by the delegates at any regular convention by a majority vote with prior notice and a 2/3 vote without prior notice. So that is the alternative language, assuming proposal E hasn't been heard or has failed. So it maintains the majority vote for deletion only. So the alternative amendment language is like if it's the contingency. So it is part of my proposal. It's the contingency in the event E hasn't been heard or has failed. So I see Mr. Roulette and Dr. Moulton. Mr. Roulette.
During the workshopping, we came up with like the idea that if a proposal came from not from the committee, but from the petitioning process, that it would actually get priority in the schedule, in the convention schedule, over the bylaws stuff. Like if you got 150 or 200 signatures on your bylaw or amendment, that it would go first, more or less. Is there still an appetite to do that? I'm not seeing that in this in these amendments.
If I may answer, when Mr. Bracco and I discussed that, I rejected it from my proposal. That I'm trying to word it the correct way that will make my point understood. Right now, committee proposals have no privilege at all. Only, I mean, from the floor, only committees do. But I don't intend to turn that so on its head that member proposals have privilege, because committees are committees for a reason. They're selected allegedly by the appointed bodies for their qualifications. They work on it as a deliberative body for a year or so, depending on where, those other proposals, but they work on it for much longer. I want the committee proposals to still have a privilege, just not the absolute privilege they have right now. Turning it completely on its head is not in the best interest. The member proposals have an earlier notice requirement. So if they're great, the committee can adopt it into its report and refine the language. But if we're going to just privilege member proposals, it really just reduces the need even to have a committee. And there are very good purposes for committees. So I rejected that quite strongly. I can't speak for the rest of the committee. I do believe I persuaded Mr. Bracco on that point. But I
Madam
don't want to
Chair,
speak for you.
You persuaded me to not put it in
Okay.
my amendment, and we'll see about what goes on later.
Okay, but that's my reasoning, Mr. Roulette. Dr. Moulton.
I do have strong opinions on that issue too, but at the present moment, I would like to propose an amendment.
Okay,
So my proposal, and I will put the language in the chat. But basically I want to take this language right here and put it replacing 1A and 1B. So it would be under Article 17, 1, and it would be this language here. replacing A
One
and B.
moment, I'm gonna take it out of this chart. And so we have it just here, and let me look. So under 17. I'm just,
Oh, and I actually, there's one thing that I do want to change before I formally propose
Okay.
it that I forgot, but let me know when you're ready for that one change.
I do want to just repost it with the change in
Oh,
chat.
sure, I can absolutely do that. Let me see. Well, actually, let me look at something real quick. Actually, no, I'll leave it as is for now, and
Okay.
yeah, we might change it in discussion, but that's fine. Okay, let me know when I may speak to this.
Okay, and that goes under, it's instead of,
It's instead of one
A
A and one B, 17.1.A and B.
would it replace one as well?
Yes, I guess it could, or it could be, or you could have notice of proposed amendments and then have that whole paragraph.
Okay, so 1 second, I'm going to put this in purple. And I know that when you do things, it's not going to behave with me. Okay, well, we're not going to worry about the indentation. I think what you're saying is you would maybe thinking of doing it like that and making this ABC. Is that what you were thinking?
Sure.
Okay.
That would be fine.
Because we don't really use bullet points in that stylistically anywhere. And I know the indents are all screwed up, but this, let me see if I can at least make it somewhat intelligible. Well, the formatting's a little weird, but what Dr. Moulton, I believe, is proposing is, I'm going to highlight this section here is to strike this section 1 and insert the purple language instead. Is that accurate, Dr. Moulton?
That's right. Well, I guess another way to do that is to keep the 1 at the top, but just remove the A and the B.
Then where would notices defined as go?
Right under 1. So
Okay,
you
okay.
can have the heading notice of proposed amendments.
Okay, so
That's what I'm saying.
let's highlight that because I want to do it the way you'd like, and then take this out.
Yep.
Like that.
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
You may speak to it, Dr. Moulton.
Okay. We did a bunch of workshopping after the meeting 2 weeks ago, and this is the thrust of what we were doing was to make things briefer, so provide brevity while still accomplishing the same thing. A lot of what is in Chair Harlow's proposal is not really necessary and is generally assumed. So it's really extra language that is not needed. The one thing that I have changed from what we were discussing and workshopping is I put a hard number, and I used the same number that Chair Harlow did of 50 sustaining members. Prior, we had 1% of sustaining membership. So that's a change I made. A difference that I'd say the main substantive difference between this and the Harlow's approach is that there is an even playing field as far as the timing between the bylaws committee and the platform committee and member proposals. And it kind of split the difference where they would, all of them would need 45 days notice. The Harlow's approach requires 35 days notice, I believe, for the bylaws and platform committees, and it requires 60-day notice for member proposals. So puts them not on an even playing field. I understand part of the reasoning for that may be that it would give the bylaws committee and platform committee time to look at member proposals and decide whether they want to recommend them or recommend against them. But nothing prevents the platform and bylaws committee from doing that anyway, because it's not really a proposal to just say yes or no. So they could still do that even if something was submitted last minute, right on the 45-day window. They'd still have an opportunity to do that. I think this is briefer, it's simpler, it accomplishes the same thing. The other part of what we workshop seems to have been integrated, which is the idea of just specifying all in one short sentence, the requirements of 2/3 with notice, 3/4 without notice, or something like that. And that's all fine. So I have no amendments to that. I do have opinions on later things, which I think Mr. Bracco is going to bring up, but I wanted to bring this workshop version before the committee as an alternative that I think is a better approach. It's clearer, it's easy to read, it's briefer, and I think it does a good job of accomplishing what we want to accomplish. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moulton. Mr. Bracco, were you waiting to speak after we got past the amendment, or would you like to speak to the amendment?
I guess actually both. So
Okay, speak
for
now
the purposes
and then
of this.
stay in line.
So I guess first thing is a point of parliamentary inquiry. The way that the proposed amendment 1C is written, would you agree with the sentiment that even or that despite there being no explicit call out to say that whether it's the bylaws and rules or the platform committee, the appropriate committee can provide commentary within the 45-day window? Would you agree with that from a parliamentary standpoint?
What do you mean by commentary?
So that include recommendations on the proposal. So like the last sentence of the original proposal 1B.
No,
The
I
committees may
don't think
include.
they officially can.
Okay. So
Their
then
report is due at a certain date. No amendments to that report are in order after that date.
so you would say that submission of a proposal is the same as submission of the report?
That's the notice. A committee, the way a committee gives notice is by submitting its report.
Point of
Okay.
information.
Yes, one moment, because if you could just wait, unless it's absolutely urgent, if Mr. Bracco could finish his thought, and then I'll go to you, Dr. Moulton.
I go ahead.
Go ahead, Dr.
It's fine with me.
Moulton.
I just wanted to push back on that. I guess my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the whole point of this notice requirement is it allows you to do something. It allows you to make a proposal. So if the bylaws committee or the platform committee is doing something that's not a proposal, that is just saying we like this or we don't, it doesn't matter whether they have notice or not for that. They're taking no action.
A recommendation isn't action, though.
That's what I'm saying.
So
Okay,
well,
I think
I'll stop.
we're getting into debate at this point. I let you know my interpretation, Mr. Bracco. That would
Okay.
ultimately be up to the party chair.
Well, given that this is a point of debate, and I think that it doesn't seem to me like anyone would be against the committee providing a recommendation.
Where they wouldn't, libertarians wouldn't be against
Well,
something.
on this committee at least, no one's spoken up to say that they are.
If I were a member, I'm going to give you the push, but just if I were a member
Okay.
and I submitted a proposal, I would be super pissed if the committee got to publish an opinion on my proposal after a submission deadline. Whether that's
As
in order
a-
or not will be up to the party chair. But if you don't think members would get pissed off about that, I think you need to meet more Libertarian Party members.
Well, I guess my answer to that would be, Madam Chair, you seem to be pushing against your own proposal because that is exactly what the initial
Oh, no, no,
One
no.
allows.
Well, I'll get to my debate.
Anyway, so given that this is a point of disagreement, would it be in order to amend the amendment at this time?
It would be.
Then I would like to add to the end of the amendment 1C, so if you could copy that last sentence of 1B in the original proposal and append it to the end, though that's not going to be the complete amendment. So what did we have? The initial one was 35 to 60. So that was a gap of 35 days. Well, if we're going to maintain that, maybe other people have a different idea of it, then I'd like to say that at the end of 1C of the new one, the committees may include recommendations on these proposals in the reports, provided those.
You need to, you need to put this
Okay,
language in chat.
Sure. I need to grab it then from the original.
Okay.
So I would like to append that sentence to the end of C. And if I could speak to it briefly,
Yes.
this would eliminate a point of disagreement, whether this is allowed or not, and this would make it explicitly allowed. And the original proposal had a member submission deadline of 60 days prior to the regular convention and a committee deadline of 35 days prior to the convention. This, given the amendments 45 days prior to the convention deadline, this would maintain that window for committees to comment of 35 days. I am personally, if somebody wants to change 10 to something else, I don't really care. That's sort of my starting point. I think it's far more important that this is explicitly granted as a power of the committees to, like, either way we go, that the committees can do this and no arguments about it. So that's my reasoning.
Okay. I was next in line originally, but I do want to speak to the amendment, and then I'll get back in line. Mr. Brackle, keep your hand raised because I know you were still wanting to speak. I think I was going to say what Dr. Moulton said. You've created a contradiction because notice is defined by 45 days. And then later on, you're talking about 10 days. And I think you've just created a contradiction in the bylaws. And resolving a contradiction is always going to be in favor of giving the members greater notice. We had this issue in Michigan where within a couple sentences, they had conflicting notice requirements. I don't think you can do it this way. I'm almost at the point of saying this amendment is out of order due to being contradictory, but I'm not going to do that at this point because I think the committee can work it out, but I think, I don't think this does what you think it does. I know Dr. Moulton wanted to talk to it too, Mr. Bracco, so I'm going to let because this is his amendment that we're making. I'm not using this word pejoratively. I say this to everybody when their things get amended. I call it mangling it because obviously the person who proposed it likes it the way it was. I don't mean that pejoratively at all.
If
Okay,
I don't want to
Mr. Bracco, go ahead, because I can tell you.
if there is no objection, I would actually like to withdraw this.
Okay. All right. So we're pretending like that never happened. And we're back to the amendment where I was in line to speak to the amendment, which is what I originally wanted to do. Okay. I'm not making this motion, but I would recommend that someone make it in the future. If we're looking for simplification, we don't need A and B. It could just say by the Bylaws and Rules Committee or the Platform Committee and put that all in one line. I'm not making that proposal because I'm not in favor of this amendment. But if this amendment's going to go forward, it can be simplified even more. I like simplicity, but I don't like simplicity at the sake of other things. All of the defects I said before, where you don't have the benefit of the committee being able to adopt a member submission, this is actually not to the benefit of the membership. I do not want simplicity at the sake of potentially giving a great member proposal the privilege that comes with a committee. Because the committee, if they see a great member proposal, can adopt it into their report. And then it gets heard earlier. I think this staggered deadline not only gives the committee opportunity, everyone keeps acting like all I want the committees to do is make a recommendation like, oh, this is good, this isn't good. No, that's not all I'm saying. They certainly can do that, but they can also say, we like this proposal, but we would change it in a certain way because due to their allegedly greater experience and having worked together, and maybe particularly on bylaws, having some special qualifications, they can improve the proposal, not just say yes or no. They could take the concept and make it better, and they need time to do that, and it needs to be included in their report. So I think the staggered deadline is very important, and my alternate proposal is greatly simplified from the original one, and it has just A and B, and also all it does here is say is notice is defined as submitting to the secretary. It doesn't say that the secretary has to do a damn thing with it. All right, you gave notice to the secretary puts it under her chair, and the members don't get to see it. Because we're not defining notice as notice to the party. We're defining it notice to the secretary, and it doesn't give any direction as to what the secretary needs to do with it. This isn't a good amendment, even if just for that, because it's defining notice and kind of like that bizarre Delaware way to give that example where it just said, well, we just need to post it somewhere. It doesn't say can't be white text on white background, which I know was ridiculous. And Alicia Matson really, really showed how ridiculous that was. But I think right here, we are really creating a gotcha in the bylaws where if a secretary doesn't like something, they're like, I got it. It doesn't tell me I have to do anything with it. So I don't think this is a thorough proposal because it sacrificed words that were very important at the altar of simplicity, and I don't agree with that. Dr. Moulton, and I'm staying in line after Dr.
Yes.
Bracco.
Okay, I would like to make an amendment to the amendment. This is to add back the staggering of the 35 to the 60. It is the latest language that is posted there.
Okay.
So yeah, you could just copy and paste it. While the secretary does that, I can read it. Notice is defined as submission of a proposal to the party secretary by the Bylaws and Rules Committee or the Platform Committee no later than 35 days prior to the regular convention, or by any party sustaining member no later than 60 days prior to the regular convention, provided that the proposal has been signed by at least 50 of the sustaining members at the time of proposal submission.
And this would
The-
be A and B, correct?
Sure. Yep. The
Before you move this, Dr. Moulton, did you want to perhaps think about saying that it has to be published on the website or something other than just being received? Okay.
No, I do not.
Okay.
We discussed this in the workshop section, and that's entirely irrelevant language. It's assumed in the duties of party secretary. If the secretary doesn't do that, then I mean that's grounds for removing the secretary.
At a convention that they're going to get elected at. Yeah, that's not going to help the members, but okay. Sorry, I'm arguing.
I mean, it's assumed that the whole point of giving it to the party secretary is that the secretary provide it to the membership. I don't think that needs to be stated. We hashed this out in the workshop, and I think that's unnecessary language. It doesn't add anything. I think that the language that is here is all that is needed to do what we want to do. I don't really care so much about staggered versus non-staggered. I thought everyone on the same even playing field was simpler, but if people prefer staggered, that's fine too. This accomplishes staggered. But oh, I'm sorry, Rob, do we want to delete of the where is that, Rob? I'm sorry.
After 50.
After 50. Oh yes, or well, yeah, of the, you're right, of the is not necessary. We just say 50 sustaining members.
Got it?
Yep. So yeah, the idea is to accomplish the same thing as Chair Harlos wants to accomplish, but in fewer words, more readable, simpler. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moulton. Okay, I am going to want to speak to the amendment, but I want to see where everyone else is at. So, Mr. Roulette, did you want to speak to the amendment to the, no, he lowered his hand. Mr.
Yes, please.
Oh, you did? Okay, go right
Yeah.
ahead.
I lower my hand when I'm about to talk
Okay,
because
thank
I
you.
don't forget. I prefer the original language of the amendment. I don't like the amendment to the amendment. And one of the, I guess the main reason why is that this allows, how exactly to phrase this? I like that what we're doing here gives people the ability to go around the committee if they don't like what the committee is doing. Like right now, people, like anybody can come to me and say, Tom, would you propose this to the committee? And, you know, 9 times out of 10, I'll put it forward to you guys, and just so that we can talk about it. However, in the future, there might be a different bylaws committee that people don't like as much. And like there may be competing factions here that want to do separate things in bylaws. Maybe.
Hush your mouth, Mr. Roulette. There's never competing factions in this party.
Yeah. And if the bylaws committee at that point is allowed to take over somebody else's proposal that they got and then modify it, put it at the end of their report and have that heard first, I don't really love that. So I do like the idea of notice being the same for the official committee and for this, we can call it the petitioners, but really it would be like a committee of 50 other people, sort of. I mean, they're not really a committee, they're just signing on, but you get what I'm saying. I like having the even playing field. I like the fact that it's briefer, and I like the fact that it would not allow a potentially future bylaws committee to take something, change it up to the point where the original people don't like it anymore, and then submit that as the thing.
Okay, Mr. Bracco, did you wish to speak to the amendment to the amendment?
No, I'd actually like to get in line after we've dealt with this amendment either way.
Yeah, you're just staying in perpetual line right now. I would like to speak to the amendment to the amendment. I like it better than the amendment. I will vote for the amendment to the amendment, though I will ultimately not be voting for the amendment as amended, as it were. But I like this better. I have to disagree with, well, actually, I'll wait till because God, it starts to get a little hairy here. I'll get into it more detail if this gets passed. I disagree with Dr. Moulton that it's implied with the party secretaries to do with this. That's very dangerous to assume that. Having been involved with a ton of party controversies this year, I can tell you that's a very, very dangerous assumption. But I don't really think we're at that point of arguing that yet. Just wanted to bring that up there. I do like this better. There was one other thing I wanted to, I wanted to counter Mr. Roulette's point. I don't think it does that. Because the members gave notice when the bylaws chair or platform chair gives their proposal, the member on the floor, when it comes time for amendments, can move the original as a substitute because they gave notice for it. So it does not give the committee the privilege Mr. Roulette thinks it does. It does slightly, though, because there is a privileged period of time for committee proposal debates. I think we reduced it to 8 minutes where it's debated without amendment. However, a person can get on the floor and argue that if we get past this 8 minutes, I'm going to move this substitute, and the substitute will be fully in order and within scope of notice because the members got to give notice. It gives only a very slight advantage to the committee. So I with all due respect to Mr. Roulette, I think there's a misunderstanding of the niceties of parliamentary procedure that was perhaps not completely comprehended in his response, because I don't think it does that. So I like the amendment to the amendment better than the amendment. Okay, I saw Mr. Martin and then Mr. Molman. And I'm leaving my hand up because I'm like Mr. Bracco. I'm in perpetual line right now. So Mr. Martin.
Yeah, I just wanted to support having a staggered deadline here, because I really think a member proposal may be in conflict with some of the committee's work. And if it's a good proposal and we like it, we might want to make some changes to our other work in order to have all the pieces fit together. If we don't have a staggered deadline, we don't really have the opportunity to even think about doing that. So our report is potentially going to be a lot better if we have a staggered deadline. The other thing is that I don't think we should assume bad faith on the part of this committee in terms of, taking some sort of opportunity because of a staggered deadline to undermine or supersede a member proposal. I don't think we ought to assume that sort of bad faith here. I certainly haven't seen it, and I wouldn't expect to. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Molman.
Yeah, hi. I'm putting a 10-year-old to bed. Brush your teeth.
Don't tell me what to do.
What was I
Okay,
saying?
go on.
That's right. Oh, trust me. He's my mini-me. What was I saying? All right. I wanted to talk about the whole split between membership proposals and committee proposals. We had in Kentucky a difference for a while, and that seemed to actually be a point of contention. Like there was this air of aristocracy that, oh, you're on a committee. And, it's funny, libertarians don't like that. Really a funny thing. They don't like the whole disparate class thing. I would say that it is better to make it exactly equal. And I will tell you that it has been my experience since making it exactly equal that we get fewer floor proposals than we've ever had. The proposals go a hell of a lot better because it doesn't start out as this adversarial thing of us versus them. And so I just want to, just my personal experience, what I've experienced in Kentucky and I've served on bylaws, I think the entire time I've been involved in Kentucky. I don't think there's not been one time I haven't been. If it's equal, it's all about the tone that gets set. And if it's set that everybody's equal, then nobody comes in mad that they're not equal. That makes sense. So I just want to emphasize that. I do like the idea of having the notice. And I think that the way that we had handled this in Kentucky was to allow the committee to submit commentary on member submitted proposals, but that's not part of the report per se, right? Because we're not proposing anything past a certain date. The report, the committee's job is really to say, here's what we recommend, and here's some proposals. But what we were able to do is have the committee put out, it's a supplemental, but it's not really a supplemental report, just based on, here's our commentary on these other things that came in. And that has worked as well, although the last couple of years, even that hasn't been necessary. So I'm just throwing it out there that was my experience. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Moulton. I would, unless Mr. Bracco has changed his mind, have you decided you want to speak on the amendment to the amendment, since you and I are the perpetual line holders here? I do, but I'd defer to you if you'd like to, since I've spoken once.
No, thank you.
Okay. It's funny, is we have the opposite experience in Colorado. We have staggered deadlines, and we've seen no member resentment over that. And in fact, typically what we see is that the committee goes, that's a good idea, and it gets incorporated into the committee report, and everyone's super happy about it. So Colorado's experience is opposite. I think Mr. Seebeck can attest to that. I'm going to say something that might be a little bit unpopular. We're not ANCOMs. We don't disavow hierarchies. We have an LNC. There is a hierarchy in this party, and there's a reason we appoint committees. Committees actually do have a higher hierarchy. And if I really haven't seen libertarians, I mean, you'll always find a libertarian that's going to get upset about something, but this isn't something I've seen as a problem. Particularly, let's not remember where we're starting from, where members have no priority at all. This is trying to give them something. So I don't think they're going to look at it as, oh, you're making the committee so much better than us, because right now the committee is way better. This is giving them more rights than they had before, and more priority than they had before. So I just respectfully disagree with Mr. Molman. I don't ever say that somebody's personal experience isn't their personal experience. Each state is different. We haven't seen that in Colorado. And for as long as I've been involved in the party, we've had staggered deadlines for that purpose. Oh, and one other thing, I'm sorry. As far as adding commentary, again, I think that will upset members more. That, oh, we got to submit something and then you're like clapping back. Like, I don't know. When it's shown their staggered deadlines, then they're not blindsided by a clap back. Some people had said earlier, oh, they'll be upset about a clap back anyway. No, I don't think they will be if they realize it can happen because of the staggered deadline. When it just comes out of the blue, I don't know. I don't think they'll like that. And as Nathan Madden had said earlier, he probably would get upset about it. I can tell you I'd get upset about it, though I tend to be more easily lathered up than other party members, but you know, I don't think I'm too unusual, though I might be more towards one extreme than the other. Mr. Molman.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, in the past, it's been possible to, I think, move to suspend the rules to bring something to the floor that either A, wasn't on the report, or B, is in a different order in the report. Would this proposal take that right away if someone, I mean, other than it, I guess it requires 3/4 notice now to do it from the floor. Is that right? Is that the only change?
Exactly. Yeah, it would require both a suspension of the rules, and then the vote threshold to actually pass the thing, as Mr. Sarwark used to like to say, would require a 3/4 vote, because we're now getting into notice. Notice doesn't only deal with the mechanics of letting people know, it also deals with the scope of amendment. So if the committee wished to propose something outside of the scope of amendment, it would be treated as if it were a floor proposal, and it would require the 3/4 and a suspension of the rules.
So it requires, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I'm clear. So it requires a suspension of the rules. It would require 3/4 to pass the suspension first before you bring the arguments.
Okay, it depends on
Okay.
how you're going to do the suspension. If you're going to, which I know people hate, and I wish Roberts didn't allow, where you can suspend the rules and adopt in all in one motion, which I kind of think is a little bit of a dirty trick, which I did a little bit earlier on this committee and regretted it after Dr. Moulton got to speak, because there's no debate on a suspension of the rules. Or if you did it in 2 steps, it would be 2/3 to suspend and then 3/4 to adopt. But if you tried to do it in one step, it would be the higher threshold of 3/4.
Of
Point of
course, thank you.
information.
I just want to make sure it was still.
Yes, Dr. Moulton?
Yeah, point of information. Am I correct then that not only members, but the Bylaws and Rules Committee can do things outside the notice window? It's just the threshold becomes higher?
They'd have to go to a mic on the floor. They wouldn't have the privilege of the podium.
Right. Well, what I'm trying to get at is that I think that the Bylaws and Rules Committee, for example, has the right to give recommendations whenever they want. It's just their notice. They would not have the notice.
They don't. Once
Afforded to
their
those
report
recommendations.
is submitted, they're discharged. I mean, the chair still gets to submit the report, but once the report is submitted, the committee as a deliberative body is discharged.
That has never been the case in the past. So you're saying as soon as we submit our report, the Bylaws Committee can no longer meet?
Right. We haven't done that in the past because there's been no notice requirements. Once there's notice requirements and the committee submits its report, it's done. They can meet informally. But all that's left is the formal presentation of the report.
I don't, I guess I just don't agree with that, but okay, we'll have to debate that later.
We do have another parliamentarian in the room. If there's no objection from the committee, Mr. Jacobs, what is your opinion on that?
Could you please restate it? Could you please restate that?
Okay, let's just say hypothetically, not hypothetically, there is a bylaws committee, and hypothetically, there's a notice requirement by which they must submit their report. Can that bylaws committee, after the submission of their prior report, still meet and deliberate and deliver additional recommendations?
Is it a standing committee?
It's a bylaws created committee.
I would say it would still continue.
Okay.
So I would have to agree with Dr. Moulton on that point.
So there's a
that-
disagreement would ultimately be up to the party chair.
Not only that, but I take issue with your saying that the notice requirement says that the bylaws committee must deliver its report by a certain time. What the notice requirement here says is that the bylaws committee must submit proposals by a certain time in order for them to get the lower vote-in threshold. It does not say that they can't submit after that time and get the higher vote-in threshold. I think they can still do that.
We disagree because I think part of it is the privilege of the podium. I think what's in their report gets the privilege of the podium. Otherwise, there's nothing stopping any bylaws committee member from going to a microphone on the floor and even speaking against the their own report. If they were one of the minority members, they just not, I mean, Robert says this, but because we have open meetings, I don't think this applies, but just to say that Robert says you can't reveal what was discussed in committee, but because we publish our meetings, I'm not so sure that would apply. But I don't think they get to say recommendations on member submissions from the podium. And it would ultimately be up to the party chair, unless we explicitly put this in here. Mr. Jacobs?
If it's acceptable, Madam Chairman, I would tend to agree on that point. While the committee would not be dissolved, the notice requirements would still apply. I think those are two separate things.
I think though, the question though, and let me ask a clarifying question to you. I think what Dr. Moulton is saying is that the bylaws committee chair can, at some point, I would most likely guess it would most occur at the end of the report, just prior to the member submissions, say, we realize that member submissions are coming up. Let's say member submissions A, B, C, and here are the committee recommendations. You should vote yes on A, and this is why. You should vote whatever. This is our recommendations. I don't think they can do that from the podium after after the report is submitted.
I would tend to agree on that. I think the report would be final unless there was some, unless the assembly would grant them that authority to further report.
Exactly. That was kind of what I was trying to say before, that I might have done a bit inartfully.
If I could just clarify real quickly for Mr. Jacobs, or JJ, I'm sorry. What my point is, I don't know if you've been listening intently or just a little bit, but the bylaw we are currently considering would grant staggered notice requirements. So something could be proposed with notice, with a low voting threshold, without notice, with a high voting threshold. And as written,
Yes, Dr.
let me finish real quickly.
Yeah,
as
but
written,
you're arguing against something I didn't say, so I just wanted to just be clear.
I don't know about that. What I'm arguing is that as written, this bylaw says that the bylaws committee, if it submits things 35 days or earlier before a convention, gets the lower notice requirement. I don't think that prevents them from submitting things for a higher voting threshold without notice, as defined in this particular thing. So what I'm trying to say is, I think the bylaws committee, like a member, has the right to submit things after that deadline. It just has to get a higher voting threshold when it does. And by doing, I think that would permit the bylaws committee, if it wanted to, from saying, we like this thing or don't like this thing. That doesn't require any sort of vote by the assembly. It is just the bylaws committee saying, we like this and we don't.
May I respond?
I'd like to respond first because
Please.
you kind of did say something I didn't say, in another way you didn't. You first, please understand that I was responding to Mr. Molman. Mr. Molman, who was arguing against the amendment to the amendment, saying that he did not want the staggered and that he did not think that not having staggered would prevent the bylaws committee from doing what we were talking about. You're arguing that the staggered allows it, which is a completely different subject than I was saying. So we're not comparing apples to apples. Mr. Molman, your names are too similar, was arguing against the amendment to the amendment. In the amendment to the amendment, in that 15-day window, certainly they can, because they haven't submitted their report yet. Once they've submitted their report, the bylaws chair cannot, with the privilege of the bylaws chair from the podium, say recommendations. That, again, the party chair will ultimately prevail on that. But I think Mr. Jacobs and I agree on that. Where we might disagree is whether the bylaws committee can still meet. And I do agree with you, Dr. Moulton, that nothing prevents any member of the bylaws committee after the 35 days from submitting something from the floor with a higher vote threshold, but they're not doing it as a bylaws member. They're doing it as a member. They would still need the 50 signatures. They'd be no different than any other member. They just happen
But
to be a member.
You're making a point which is not mine.
Okay, yeah, we're both kind of
point,
doing that, I think.
What my point is I'm reading the language right in front of us, which I proposed, by the way. And what this language says is the bylaws committee can submit things before a deadline. And if they submit things before a particular deadline, there's a lower vote-in threshold. I don't think anything prevents them from submitting things after that deadline and therefore getting a higher voting threshold. Instead of 35 days, if they submitted it 30 days, 15 days, 20 days, 5 days, I think they would still have the authority to do so, but the voting threshold would be hiked up. Instead of being 2/3, it would be 3/4. That is my point.
Yeah, no, I absolutely would disagree. And Mr. Bracco has his hand. We're going to hear from him next before we hear from Mr. Jacobs. But it gives the bylaws committee authority only up till 35 days before. After that, they've got to do it like any other member. They're not the bylaws committee submission anymore. Mr. Bracco.
So I guess a couple of points of information and then possibly one of parliamentary inquiry. So first point of information, a recommendation of the bylaws committee would be a formal vote, just like a proposal would be. Is that correct?
Correct.
So we would have like yes, no, and I guess would it also be, could there be a minority report to have a different recommendation?
Correct.
Okay. And second point of information, we have not yet dealt with the amendment to the amendment, right?
Well, this is all related to the amendment to the amendment. It all started from Mr. Molman's argument against the amendment to the amendment that led on this trail.
Okay. And the point of parliamentary inquiry, the language of the original proposal 1A, it says that the platform committee and the bylaws and rules committee must provide reports, whereas the amendment and the amendment to the amendment say that the proposal, are reports and proposals the same thing or different things?
They're different things. I think it's reasonably assumed that a committee will deliver a proposal in the form of a report, but I do think you have a point there as well. They aren't exactly the same thing, though I think most people would consider it the same, but if someone wanted to be a pain in the ass, they're not. I think a report's more formal.
One last, I guess, point of parliamentary inquiry then. Under the language as written of either, let's put aside the staggered nature of it. Would the bylaws and rules or the platform committee have the opportunity under the amended language, either of the Primple versions, to say reorder the report because, like, within the 35-day window, even though you're not changing a proposal, but say we want B over A instead of A over B, but B and A themselves, the proposal B and A are the same. Would that be in order, or would that then trigger, oh, you failed notice 3/4?
No, order doesn't have to do with notice, but it does have to do with committee authority. The report is the report at the time of submission. When you have this in the original proposal that you asked about in your point of parliamentary inquiry, unless the committee made a resolution that they grant the committee chair discretion to change the order under certain conditions or whatever, which often is asked by the committee chair. And I will tell you that I will be asking the committee for that authority because I know how to read the room, and sometimes things need to be changed on the fly because of changing conditions. Sometimes it's granted, sometimes it's not. But once the report is submitted, unless there is some kind of ongoing authority to the committee chair to flip things around, the report is the report. But that doesn't really have to do with notice. That just has to do with authority of the committee and their approval of the report. But it's not a notice thing. Without objection, Mr. Jacobs, and then we're going to go to Mr. Molman.
Madam Chair, I would say that that once the committee has made its report, that it's its final report, and it would lose the authority to make further reports unless the assembly would grant that authority. So I believe I'm agreeing with you on that point. Even if the committee still exists, could meet, and could technically request that authority, it would be up to the assembly, not even to the chair, but to the assembly to grant that ability.
I think we're saying the same thing. I think we're now coming to a convergence point.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Bracco, I'm putting you behind Mr. Molman. Mr. Molman.
I think JJ just said pretty much what I was going to get to. Is at the end of the day, my big issue is I want the members to have the right. Because I've been on LNCs, I've been to conventions where particular caucuses had control of particular committees and rammed stuff through that the majority of delegates did not want. I specifically remember handing out pamphlets with Mr. Moulton or Dr. Moulton. He was Mr. Moulton at the time, I believe, but now Dr. Moulton. That was 2014, I think it was. I can't remember if that was platform or bylaws. It was one of the two. We were flyering the heck out of the hall. It is critical that our members have the right to override a committee gone wild. And that I just want to make sure that that's preserved because it's been done. And especially since our committees aren't chosen by the convention body to whom they're supposed to report to, which is a little bit weird in my opinion, but regardless, it becomes more of an issue of making sure that our members get out of this organization what they want. That's all I want to make sure that that's preserved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Molman. I have Mr. Bracco and then myself again, though I'll make it very brief because I don't want to. I think we're starting to get to the point of repetitiveness. Mr. Bracco?
So there was something brought up, I guess this would be a parliamentary inquiry, where it was said the assembly can grant the bylaws and rules committee chair or the platform committee chair the authority to reorder the report.
No, that isn't what was said.
I think that's what Mr. Jacobs said, and this is sort of my
No, he
what I
did
wanted to
not.
clarify. So,
Mr. Jacobs can correct me, but he had said if there were additional recommendations that were not included in the report, that the assembly could grant the privilege of the podium to the bylaws committee chair to make those recommendations. Ordering has nothing really to do with this section.
So that's not what I was really asking, I guess. So let me clarify. When it said that the assembly can grant the bylaws and rules committee chair, the assembly is the delegates at convention,
Yes,
or is it the committee itself?
it's the delegates.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, my brief rebuttal to Dr. Mulman, they already can control a committee run amok by the procedure you just said. You do conventioneering and you vote stuff down. This notice requirement, staggered or not, gives them way more power. And you and I, Mr. Mulman, my God, you're both doctors now. You're both doctors, whether you like it or not. You and I both, and Dr. Moulton, have experience of successfully conventioneering to get things passed. Dr. Moulton Boo Hiss with the Portland Massacre, myself with closing the back door. I know, Mr. Mulman, you've been very successful at this before.
I've also proposed a bylaw still in the
Yeah.
bylaws,
So, it can be, it already was able to be done in the older rigged system that we're looking to replace. It'll be even easier to do here. I don't want to swing it too far in the other direction. There is still a purpose to having committees that have the more careful deliberation. I think we've all agreed earlier that some really harebrained, ill-thought things come out from the floor. You can even get 50 people to sign on to some really dumb things sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, any further debate on the amendment to the amendment? I know myself, the chair, actually, I know I always refer to myself. I don't like this third person thing, but I know Mr. Jacobs after this meeting is going to be like, I'm going to grade you and you didn't refer to yourself properly. I know the chair and Mr. Bracco have our hands perpetually raised. Mr. Mulman.
I have a question. Given that my position that I want it to be equal, does this amendment make it less equal or more equal between the public, the members, and the? I'm so lost in all these various proposals. I've read them all on the list. I am so confused as to, and we've picked and chosen pieces. I'm just lost. I just need a simple answer. Does this make it the gap between the committee and the delegates wider or narrower in
All
this
three
particular
proposals,
amendment?
The amendment to the amendment, and the original proposal all narrow that gap. They all give greater power to the delegates than they have now. Did that answer your question?
Maybe. Is Mr. Seebeck back, by the way?
No. Mr. Roulette.
I think I understand what Mr. Mulman is asking, and if I could offer an opinion, I think that the most equal thing is the amendment, and that the amendment to the amendment, which we are debating right now, makes it slightly less equal.
Thank you, Mr. Roulette. My brief response is, I'm not in favor of complete equality because there's a purpose to having committees. I am looking for the committee to have an advantage, much slighter than they have now, but there's still a purpose to having committees that need to be able to refine proposals. Mr. Molman, I don't know if you had further thoughts. You still had your hand raised.
Oops, that's an artifact. Sorry.
Mr. Bracco, are you just in the perpetual mode?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing that Mr. Roulette said.
Okay. All right. So we're on the amendment to the amendment. Is there further debate on the amendment to the amendment?
Madam Chair, I apologize. Is the part in yellow the amendment to the amendment, or is the part in
No,
purple the amendment to the
let me
amendment?
explain, and no need to apologize. The part in yellow is the original, my original motion. The original amendment is this strike through language I'm highlighting with my cursor. The amendment to the amendment is now this language below it. So this language below it, if passes, becomes then the primary amendment, which is then competing against the highlighted language. So if we're going to just, let's do some hard returns here to get stuff off the screen. What is being proposed right now is to take this non-struck language to replace in place of what is a struck. A no vote will get rid of this here and we'll keep this language that has the line struck through it. A yes vote will get rid of that language with the line stuck through it. And then the second part there will become the primary amendment, which will then be competing with that highlighted language. Is that now clear?
I think so. Thank you.
Okay. So giving one more opportunity for debate on the amendment to the amendment, because there might have been some lack of clarity. I do have just one brief comment to make. I'm seeing if anyone else does. Because there's been so much discussion, I just want to say I favor the amendment to the amendment, even though I ultimately don't favor the amendment as amended ultimately. But if we're going to pass an amendment, I like the amendment to the amendment better. Anyone else? Okay, Ms. Arrowood, if you could take a roll call vote, we are voting on whether to adopt the amendment to the amendment. You're muted, Ms. Arrowood. Did we lose her?
I think she's asleep.
Sylvia. Oh my goodness, I think you're right.
Anybody got her phone number and can give her a call?
Yes. And now I'm worried. I don't want to be laughing that she's asleep. I want to make sure she's okay.
We should have debated something
I can
more
see her breathing.
exciting.
Okay, well, that's always good.
This happens on the Friday night happy hour all the time.
I know I have her number somewhere. Oh my God, I'll just take the roll call vote. Oh,
Here we go.
Sylvia, did you fall asleep? You're muted.
No, I just turned around for a minute. And I guess
Okay, we all thought you were sleeping. So we're ready for a
That might
roll
have been
call
an
vote.
internet lag thing too.
okay.
That's the best part of the meeting.
Arrowwood, I'm going to say yes. Bracco,
Yes.
Nicholas Sazelski,
Yes.
Rob Latham,
Yes.
Frank Martin,
Yes.
Ken Molman.
I'll be the one-off no.
All right. Tom Rowlett,
No.
Mike Ruffo,
Yes.
Mike Seebeck.
He's not here. It will be Dr. Moulton in his place.
Okay. I'm sorry. Dr. Chuck Moulton,
Abstain.
okay. Madam Chair, we have 8 yeses. I mean, sorry, 6 yeses, 2 noes, and 1 abstain so far. Do you care to vote?
No, thank you.
All right.
Okay.
6 yes. 3 noes. I'm sorry. 3 noes,
No, 2 no's.
2 noes, okay. And 1 abstain.
Okay. So now we're on and we're coming up on time. So but I do appreciate, I'm not saying that sarcastically, how much we hash these things out. I think it will really show in our report. So now we're on the amendment. So the language in purple is the amendment. The highlighted language is the original. I know both myself and Mr. Bracco wanted to speak. Now, at this point, I believe, Mr. Bracco.
Actually not now.
Oh, okay.
Once this question has been dealt with, I would like.
Okay. All right. I like the amended amendment better, but I still don't like the amendment ultimately over the original because it does not specify with enough clarity what notice actually means. It just says giving it to the secretary. I'm sorry, I do not agree with Dr. Moulton that it's assumed. When it comes to things like notice, you get granular, you get specific, because this deals with members' rights. And I don't want assumptions when it comes to that. And also, again, I know Colorado's not the nation, just like Kentucky's not the nation, but our experiences in our various states can be helpful. Even in I'm going to give a parallel in the parties standing, special rules of order, standing rules, whatever it is, our policy manual, it even says that there's a certain number of days that the party secretary has to start a ballot by, because it just used to say that the chair or the secretary would start a ballot. Well, if we didn't really like the vote, like when do we have to start the ballot by? What's a reasonable time frame? We stuck it in the special rules that it's within 2 days. These details do add words, but they are words that give rights to members. I want words that give rights to members, that says exactly what they can expect. And the difference between proposal and report isn't minor. And report, I think, would then make sure the minority reports are included as well. A proposal, where do minority reports fit in here? I might even, when we get back to the main proposal, if we don't adopt the amendment, amend it to make it clear that the report will include minority reports as well, because I think there should be notice of those. Otherwise, you get into a weird voting threshold as well. I think the word proposal is way too vague, and I think the duties of what notice actually means is way too vague. Mr. Bracco, then Mr. Molman.
Just very briefly, in 1A of the original proposal, you do reference minority reports.
Oh, well, see, Great. My great mind thinks with my great mind. Sorry about that. I had to pat myself on the back. Okay. That shows that at least I'm consistent in my thinking. Thank you, Mr. Bracco. Did you have anything further?
Not at this time.
Mr. Molman?
Just real quick, when it comes to giving definition and further refining things, my immediate thought was perhaps putting the shorter version in the bylaws and putting the more descriptive into the convention rules of order. The secretary cannot arbitrarily, but see, then never mind. That's not going to work because this happens before the convention.
Right.
The convention rules of order wouldn't apply.
And notice
Right.
is a bylaw. It's not a rule.
Right. Well, I was more thinking that what I was getting at was anywhere where we can be less specific. Giving the convention body flexibility is always good. Usually good. Not always, but usually. The goal is to make sure that the officers, the people in particular roles, execute their duties.
Mhm.
So insofar as that's concerned, we can put those convention duties in the convention rules of order, right? Or at least the specifics of those duties. We put the duty, the high level in the bylaws, and then we can put the deeper descriptive, how it actually happens into the rules of order. And then if the body wants to be like, screw all that, we can just go on through. We don't care about this. We're good with it. They can suspend the rules and they can ram it right on through because they can do that. Whereas, as we're all aware, you can't suspend bylaws. So,
Unless it's in the nature
that was
of
my
a rule of
thought.
order. But these really aren't.
Yeah. Right. So, all right. So I do see what you're saying. So other than the mention of the minority reports, and because I'm reading this on a phone screen, which makes my life awful, and I apologize. It's not your fault. It's my fault for being on a phone. I guess my question is, I see the minority reports in the yellow. I see.
No.
Private Secretary.
The yellow is the original proposal. The
Yes.
purple is the amendment, which is proposing to strike out A and B and
Right.
putting in the purple language.
What I'm trying to find out is substantively, what is the difference? I mean, not just the fewer words or any of that. What substantively is the difference? I see minority reports in the top one and not in the bottom one.
I'm going to read
What
them
else am I
out
missing
loud.
here?
Is that okay, Mr. Molman? Because I think it'll make it
Sure,
obvious to
sure.
everyone. So in the original proposal, one thing stays the same. Article 17, number 1, notice of proposed amendments. That doesn't change. In the amendment, a sentence is added. Notice is defined as submission of a proposal to the party secretary, : That section is not in the original. The original immediately moves on to A. The platform committee and the bylaws and rules committee must provide reports of their recommendations along with minority reports to the party secretary at least 35 days prior to the regular convention, which then shall be published on the party website within 5 days of receipt. A in the amendment says, by the bylaws and rules committee or the platform committee, no later than 35 days prior to the regular convention. The original B says, any party sustaining member may submit to the party secretary proposals to amend either the platform or these bylaws, provided they are signed by 50 sustaining members at the time of proposal submission and provided to the party secretary no later than 60 days prior to the regular convention. These proposals shall be forwarded to the respective committee chairs and published on the party website within 5 days of receipt. The committees may include recommendations on these proposals and their reports. B of the amendment says, by any party sustaining member no later than 60 days prior to the regular convention, provided that the proposal has been signed by at least 50 sustaining members at the time of proposal submission. I'm going to editorialize slightly. What the difference is is in the amendment, notice is defined as submission to the secretary. It doesn't talk about anything to do with publication. In paragraph A, there are timeframes given as to how long the secretary has to post it to the website. In amendment B, it has timeframes for when the party secretary must post it to the website, which is the same time frame that they must post it, send it to the respective committee chairs, and also an explicit permission of recommendations on these proposals in the committee reports.
Okay. I'm going to let debate go for a minute, but I may have an amendment again, and I apologize, but actually we're out of time. I would like to move to extend time by, let's do 15 minutes because we'll use it.
Okay, is there any objection to extending time by 15 minutes? Say it verbally if you have an objection. Hearing no objection, time is extended. Mr. Mullman, did you have anything further to say, or you were just waiting to see further debate?
I was going to let others get in. I don't want to be the guy who, before there's a debate, jumps in and
Yeah, that makes sense on the LNC, but on committees, when you have as much time as you need, I get you. Okay, Dr. Moulton.
Yes. I would to speak again briefly about this notion of the secretary get in a proposal and then not distributing it to the membership. The chair has alleged that that's a problem with the amendment here, but I think it's a problem in the original proposal as well, because what do you do if the bylaws, if there's a bylaws proposal or platform proposal that's submitted to the secretary, then the secretary doesn't distribute it. The secretary could just not distribute it in the original formulation as well. Nothing prevents that from happening. And does that mean that there wasn't actual notice if the secretary doesn't distribute it, or is there still effective notice? What remedy do you have? Is it means to remove the secretary? I mean, maybe, but that's, I mean, I would say that's still the case with the amendment. Again, in my opinion, there's no substantive difference between the two. It is assumed that the secretary is going to distribute it. The original proposal explicitly says the secretary will distribute it in a period of time, but in both cases, the secretary could not distribute it, and you have a problem either way. Thank you.
Was someone calling a point of order? I thought I heard in the background.
That was me, Madam Chair, and I apologize. I was having sound problems. I couldn't hear anyone, and I thought that maybe the call got jacked up, but it was me. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. I'd like to address Dr. Moulton's thing. What if the LNC doesn't call an annual a convention? I mean, we can always do this. The phrase that I became famous for at the 2020 convention, we can always mind the subjunctive. I think explicitly laying out the duties gives an expectation. I do think the party chair can then step in and they know what to do. You always can have an issue where somebody doesn't do what they're supposed to do, but it makes it a lot easier to say they didn't when it's spelled out. Because right now you might say, well, it's implied that the secretary publishes it on the website. How long do they have? Is it implied that they do it in a week? Is it implied that they do it within 10 days? Is it implied that they just do it before the convention? I'd rather have it spelled out. And ultimately, the buck's going to stop with the party chair. And also, I would say the convention oversight chair would be taking a look at this as well. When everyone knows what their duties are, you know, there isn't a remedy for everything on a lot of things in our bylaws. The remedy would be that things get moved from the floor and people can get all lathered up and they'll get the 3/4 vote. And a remedy also could be a member lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty to the party. And it's explicitly spelled out. Mr. Bracco.
So since the topic of rogue secretaries has come up, I'd like to give some anecdotal evidence here. We recently had something in the LPVA where, among others, the secretary was basically attempting to sabotage the party. There was a member submitted petition to call a special convention that the bylaws required that we submit it to the secretary and the secretary publish it. In this instance, the petition was submitted to the secretary. It was never published officially by the party, or officially by the secretary, I should say. But the it was published in other means unofficially, and we just went forward with the thing. So I don't think that a rogue secretary is necessarily like a hard and fast roadblock. If I'm sure that Mr. Jacobs would be able to, or JJ would be able to offer some commentary. He was also very involved in that situation. Just wanted to offer up some evidence of like a real world instance where this sort of thing came up.
I mean, there's not a remedy for every single thing that's a duty on here. The ultimate remedy is that we're a DC corporation in which the officers or the directors is how everyone's defined in a nonprofit law and corporation have a fiduciary duty that they can be sued for. That's the ultimate remedy. But because we do allow things to get moved with 3/4 from the floor, if the secretary went rogue, I think you're probably, if it's a good proposal, you're going to get those 3/4. That's ultimately your remedy. With the vague language, you can't even say that something's been breached because, well, it's implied. I mean, already in this committee, we have disagreement as to whether it's implied. Do you think in a room of 1,050 delegates, everyone's going to agree it's implied? I mean, I'm the actual like literal secretary, and I don't think it's implied at all. And I'm not a bad faith actor. Any further debate on the amendment to the proposal, Mr. Molman?
If there's no one else in line, I'd like to propose an amendment or make a move to amend. Sorry.
To the
It's late.
amendment?
I'm tired. Yes, amendment to the amendment.
Okay.
That is simply to put after the line that says notice is defined as submission of a proposal to the party secretary before the colon, adding the words. John. Where'd it go? Oh, sorry. I had this in my head and then I'm tired. It's late. This is fine. Submission approval to the secretary, comma, who shall forward to the respective committee chairs and publish on the party website. I got that right. Even though it's the same, and I'll explain it in a second, because it seems weird that the chairs would get a copy, but it's actually a double check thing. Yeah.
Oops, wrong thing.
Who shall forward the proposal, and maybe put a parenthesis. Yeah, who shall forward the proposals? Sorry. The proposal and then S in parentheses. That makes sense. Yeah.
Did you wish to speak to that, Mr. Molman?
Sure. I think this resolves the issue. Oh, I'm sorry. Damn it. And I apologize. I still didn't finish it.
Okay.
party website within, I'm trying to get the language, the within 5 days of receipt. That's what I want there at the end. So I'm getting instead of having it in both sections, it covers it right there. It covers the 5 days. And while it may seem weird that the committee submits it and it comes back to the committee chair, it'll validate that the secretary has received an accurate copy of the report. And I'm hoping that this just resolves the issue of the whole 5 days thing while also keeping it brief. And I've got a 10-year-old with a bloody nose.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Molman. I'd like to speak against the amendment to the amendment. It seems like we're just trying to recreate the original proposal, in other words, and we're saving like 10 words. And why did we do this? Because we're almost back to the original proposal. And to me, in a less straightforward and elegant way to save 15 words. Let me tell you what the problem still is, though. This is better. Again, I like it better. I will vote for the amendment to the amendment and still ultimately vote against the amendment. The word proposals isn't as clear as reports and minority reports. There's a bit of a difference between what the platform and bylaws committees do and what members do. Members submit proposals. Those committees submit reports. I would suggest if people are trying not to just repeat that 5 days things twice, that perhaps you amend the original proposal a little bit differently to have that opening sentence there in some way. But I don't think you can blur this distinction between proposals and reports and not include minority reports. I think we've just spent a couple hours to say 15 words when the original proposal was perfectly serviceable, honestly. Is there any further debate on, I see Mr. Roulette and Mr. Molman. Mr. Roulette, on the amendment to the amendment or further?
On the amendment to the amendment,
Okay.
if this gets amended this way, does that mean that if the party secretary doesn't forward and or put it on the website, that notice is not given? Like that, I know that's not the intent, but would that be the effect?
It would, I don't really think that's, I'm going to answer the question though. I'm not so sure it's germane because it's not different. That same issue as Mr. Molman has brought up could be said about the original. And ultimately it would be up to the party chair. I would say, yes, that means that notice was blown and everything would have to be done by the floor, and that the delegate should take the secretary out behind the building and give them a stern talking to, or perhaps violate the NAP. I didn't say that. But yes, notice will not have been given. I had Mr. Molman, then Mr. Bracco.
Yeah, and I agree with the point you just made about, I think notice would end up getting blown, but at the same time, the secretary would be in breach of their duties at that point as well.
Yep.
Right? That's what we're outlining here in both versions.
Yes.
So long story short is, what I was going to ask is, isn't a report just a series of proposals?
No, a report also includes rationales. And introductory language. There's often many other things included in a report. There can be appendices, there can be exhibits. Proposals are just that, bare proposals. I want committees to deliver a report.
And I guess that's the case, but I don't know.
And
I don't see a
minority reports
scenario-
are not proposals. And if you don't include that, you've just made minority reports require 3/4.
Actually, I'll ask that question. Why would a minority report not be a proposal? It's been submitted by the committee.
It hasn't been
On
submitted
behalf
by
of
the
the committee.
committee. The committee
Well, I thought-
is the majority.
Right. And then the minority of the committee submits a report as well.
That is not, though, the report
Or-
of the committee. It's the report of a minority. You have to specifically, it's not a proposal. The convention can decline to hear the minority report.
True. They could technically decline to hear the main report too. Yeah.
Technically, they can
okay.
decline, they can adjourn the convention the minute it's, called to
Technically, they
order as
can
well.
adjourn without hearing the report. That may
Yeah,
or may not have
but-
happened recently.
But there's a reason it's called a minority report. I mean,
Right. Okay.
okay, Mr. Bracco.
I rescind my physical raising of hand.
Okay, we are at time, actually. I would love to dispose, though, of this. I'm going to move to extend for another 15 minutes or until this, for 15 minutes or until we dispose of this amendment one way or another, whichever comes first. Is there any objection? Please say so verbally.
Yeah, I'm gonna object to it. Only
That means we're gonna do a vote. Ms. Arrowood, there's a motion to extend for 15 minutes or earlier if we dispose, if we get to a primary with no pending amendments. Please take a roll call.
I
Madam
was just going to ask, was that Bracco that objected to extend?
Yes,
I
yes.
just wanted to be sure.
Point of information.
Madam-
yes, Dr. Moulton.
Could I just inquire, Mr. Bracco, did you object because you wanted to further amend later? Is that why?
I actually objected because I don't like the indefinite part. Like the 15 minutes is fine. I don't like until we're done.
Okay, 15, well, it was
Thank you.
15 minutes in. Do you withdraw your objection? if
I
just make it
withdraw
15?
my objection.
Okay, is there any
Okay.
objection to extending for 15 minutes? Hearing none, we're extended for 15 minutes. Mr. Roulette, did you have further debate on the amendment to the amendment?
Yeah, just very briefly, I'd like to speak against the amendment to the amendment. We're being asked essentially to choose between two dangers. One danger is a party secretary not doing what he or she is supposed to do, and then blowing notice for a proposal that comes from outside of the committee. The other danger is that the secretary might not actually post the committee's might not post something on the website because it's not spelled out in the bylaws. Between those two dangers, I prefer to have the danger that does not disadvantage a proposal that some future party secretary might try to nix by not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Like between those two bad things, I think that would be worse. So I'm going to vote against the amendment to the amendment. I still like Dr. Moulton's original. You know where I'm at.
Thank you, Mr. Roulette. Okay, seeing no further debate on the amendment to the amendment, which is to add the green language. Ms. Arrowood, please take a roll call vote.
Arrowood, I'm going to say no. Bracco,
Yes.
Sizelski,
Yes.
Latham.
Abstain.
All right. Martin,
Yes.
Molman,
Yes.
He said yes, Miss Arrowood.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Okay. Rowlett,
Nope.
Rufo,
I'm going to abstain.
all right. Mike Seebeck,
He's not here.
okay. Oh, Dr. Chuck Moulton, sorry.
I vote no.
All right. Madam Chair, do you care to vote?
I show 4 yes, 3 no, 2 abstentions.
Yes.
I will not vote. My vote will not make, well, I could cause a tie, but I'm not going to. I'm actually in favor of it. So I'm not going to vote.
All right. 1, 2, 3, yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, no. 1, 2, 3. Okay. We have 3 yeses, 4 nos, and 3 abstains.
Okay, so now we're back to a primary amendment, competing with the primary. I'm going to be asking for debate on this. I'm going to just speak briefly because we really are getting into repetitive. I prefer the original. We're saving 15 words and sacrificing clarity. And I don't know if it's exactly 15. I'm being estimating. Okay, we're going to have a vote now as to whether to adopt the amendment to the primary. Ms. Arrowood, if you could do a roll call vote.
All right. Arrowwood, I'm going to pass. Bracco,
Point of information, a yes vote would replace the original proposal and a no vote would leave it intact. Is that correct?
Yeah, let me clarify this. If you aren't clear, others aren't. A yes vote would get rid of all of the highlighted language and instead put in the purple language. A no
Madam
vote
Chair.
would, yes, Mr. Mullen.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I just realized that the purple language is not correct. That motion failed.
No,
And
it
the
didn't.
who shall forward.
No, it
didn't it?
didn't. Nope, it passed. It passed
Oh,
4.
I am
3,
so sorry.
3.
I thought it was the other way around. My
No.
my apologies.
Nope, I would have voted if it was because I was in favor of it. So get back to the point of information. A yes vote would make the purple language the main proposal. You know, that would go in with all the rest. A no vote would keep the original highlighted language, which was the original proposal. Is that clear now, Mr. Bracco?
Yes, it is. I would like to vote no.
Nicholas Sazelski,
I vote no.
Rob Latham,
No.
Frank Martin,
No.
Ken Molman,
I'll vote yes.
Tom Rowlett,
Yes.
Mike Rufo,
No.
Dr. Chuck Moulton,
Yes.
Arrowwood, I'm going to vote no. Madam Chair, do you care to vote?
My vote will not make a difference. I will not vote.
All right.
Okay, we are back to the original proposal. I do encourage the committee not to ever think that these extended discussions are wastes of time. Even when we get back to the original, it is an iron sharpens iron situation. I do think our proposals are better for it. Please don't ever be frustrated by that. We have a few more minutes, 7 more minutes. Mr. Bracco, I think you wanted to talk when we were at this point.
Yes, ma'am. I would like to propose an amendment.
We love you for it, Mr. Bracco.
However, I would like to make one slight change from what what is in the agenda. So let's see, which one is the more appropriate one? So I did mine a little bit differently. If people could look there, let's start. Let's see, let's do E fails.
Okay, hold on, let's go there.
I think that one's got additional language that's not in the E passes version. So this is just I did two different versions. So there is one sentence that I would like to add in addition to this, and I'll put it in the chat. And I think this might be the benefit of our discussion, hopefully.
So are you doing a substitute of the entire proposal?
Let's say yes, but I think it's actually not too substantive. I can explain where the differences are. However, the one thing I'd like to change is in the chat, I put a sentence. If you could add that to the end of 1A.
What? Okay, this is going to be separate then because it's entirely different subject matter. Hold on one second.
I don't think it is.
It is, and it will be divisible upon the demand of one member because you're dealing with notice, and then the other thing, your other proposal gets into
Okay. Fair
yeah.
enough.
So what I would
Well,
suggest.
Okay, then let me do. Forget what I put.
Oh, boy.
So let's just add to the end of A, and that's it. That's all I'm doing. That one sentence.
Oh,
where?
In the chat. In the event the party secretary fails to post the proposal after 5 days, notice shall be considered met.
Okay, hold on. I need to think about this because I'm not so sure that's in order.
Post.
Because you give a notice requirement and then says if they don't complete the notice requirement, notice is still met. I hold on, I'm thinking. I think you just voided a requirement, and that is in contradiction to what we just passed, and it would require reconsideration. Like, I don't think that's an order, Mr. Bracco.
So, Madam Chair, was it, while that amendment was pending, was it in order to amend the original proposal in a different way?
Okay, it's in order now, but in a different way. Let me explain. I'm not saying it's not in order because you didn't do it at the right time. I'm saying it's not in order because it's like saying blue is red except for when red isn't blue. You're amending something to contradict the statement right before it. You can't both have notice and not have notice. This isn't Schrodinger's notice. The cat is either alive or it's dead. So if you want to not have 5 days and still be noticed, then you need to eliminate the 5 days. You can't have it both ways. It's Schrodinger's notice, and I don't think that's in order. It's not that because it wasn't done at the right time. It's because it's conflicting. I think you have to amend more. Just adding that makes the proposal nonsensical.
Madam Chair, would it be in order for me to ask if Mr. Jacobs could speak to the matter? Or JJ, whatever, sorry.
I'm going to say at this point, no, but the committee can override me. The committee by majority vote can allow a non-member to speak. But I start to
we
get
don't
to the
have
point
time.
where, parliamentarians, he's not our party parliamentarian. Parliamentarians generally advise the chair, not the assembly. And we're now allowing non-members to get a bit too much into debate. The committee can override me. You can move to allow Mr. Jacobs to speak. It will require a majority vote. Actually, a 2/3 vote, excuse me.
Madam Chair, we have about 30 seconds left of this
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah, that's kind of why not.
And Marion said exactly what I said, but in different words, and sometimes different words makes a difference. Marion said, I think she's saying that the rule gets nullified by the nature of not following it. So what's the point? It's exactly it. You either have the rule or you don't.
Then I guess I think that the difference here where it doesn't apply as red and is blue and blue is red is that this is a person who we're talking about. And it's like in this case, the person is supposed to do it. What happens if they don't? It's sort of like you have a
I understand your point, Mr. Bracco, but I'm saying
like
it's
how
out
is
of
this not
order.
how is it not an exception to the rule that we just established?
You
So-
can appeal me if you'd like, but I'm saying that amendment's not in order.
Then, well, I don't know that we have time.
We can take it up next time, most certainly.
Sure, then I would like to appeal that.
Okay, so I want to get that language here in the notes so we don't lose it.
Then, Madam Chair, as soon as you're done with that, I'm going to call for orders of the day.
Okay, yeah. Let me just, I just want to make sure our record's preserved. So, I'm gonna highlight, well, that's kind of hard to read, but in any event, I can read it. So let me just put a note here. Oh, God. I want to get rid of that. Chair rolled out of order. Bracco appealed. Start here. Okay, I just want us to know where we're at. All right, unless there's a motion to extend time, we are going to be adjourned.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ms. Arrowood.
we did not approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Well, we're going to defer that to an email vote. There were some corrections that Mr. Latham posted on the list. If you could make those corrections, post a
Sure.
corrected version, and we will do an email vote on that.
Sure.
All right, is there a motion to extend time? Say it verbally if there is, because I see hands raised and stuff.
Point of information,
Yes, Dr. Moulton.
after the meeting adjourns, will you stick around or
Yep.
do you have to go? Okay.
No,
thank you.
I don't need to go. Okay, so I see no motion to extend time. So we are adjourned at 9:17. Just to let you know when the next meeting date is. Oops. What day was today? Oh, on May 18th is our next meeting date. So we are adjourned.